Hello fiber friends, and welcome to the Jillian Eve channel. For this video, I am going to be spinning a project with my Canadian production wheel. I want to share with you all of his quirks. Yes, he is a he. That's just, I don't know. I personify my wheels and I name my wheels, and I get big draft horse vibes from this wheel, and so I affectionately call him Philippe because he makes me think of the horse from Beauty and the Beast. He is a workhorse, that is for sure. So I want to talk about the history of Canadian production wheels, how to identify a Canadian production wheel, show you this project that I'm doing, and also to talk about some of the quirks that Philippe has, because perhaps if you have found your own Canadian production wheel, or CPW, which is a little easier to say, you might have some quirks working with it as well, and maybe me sharing some of the little things that are fussy and a little quirky will help you with your own spinning. So let's talk first about the fiber that I'm spinning, and then I'm going to give you this overview of the wheel. While I'm doing some spinning, I will also talk about the history of this fascinating piece of history, and I think this is going to be a good time and a great project, so let's get spinning. The fiber that I'm spinning for this project came from Rock and String Creations. This was a deep stash dive. It was given to me by a friend who dug this out of her stash, and then it ended up in my stash. So I'm really not sure how old this fiber is, but it says artisan dyed yarn and fiber, and there is an Etsy shop, so I will link that in the description down below. This is 4 ounces of Mountain Twilight. It is 70% alpaca and 30% merino. I'm finding this fiber very interesting to spin because it's not what we usually would call a comb top. This is actually a pencil roving. It came all braided up, and as you pull it out to spin and draft from it, this is how it is prepared. This is not split apart or pre-drafted at all. This is the very thin pencil roving that this fiber is prepared to be. So this is what I'm spinning from. And with a Canadian production wheel, Longdraw is a really good way to take advantage of the speed that a CPW has. And by speed, I mean that every treadle is going to get a lot of turns of the flyer, and that means a lot of twist in your yarn. So if you're doing something that's a very slow kind of short forward draft, you're not really taking advantage, and you're going to possibly even have an over twisted yarn, and you're really going to feel like you need to slow your foot down, which this wheel doesn't want to go slow. Everything about this wheel is designed to go fast. So a thin yarn that's drafted in a long draw style is going to really take advantage of the mechanics and the design of this wheel. And so that's what I'm doing with this fiber. I've already spun half of this fiber. I am planning to have a lace weight 2-ply of this fiber. And since this wheel only has 1 bobbin, how can we do a 2-ply yarn with only 1 bobbin? Well, that's where storage bobbins come in. And I want to mention this because if you are working with an antique wheel, it's a very good likelihood that you won't have any spare bobbins. And so this is a great option to get more out of your antique wheels. So this is a storage bobbin. It's not set up to be on a spinning wheel. It does have a tiny little groove right here that you can use on a tensioned lazy Kate if you have a tension system for a lazy Kate, but otherwise this is not meant to be on a spinning wheel. This is only meant to hold your yarn. It came with this piece that goes into the bobbin, and what does this side do? It is meant for a power drill. Yes, this bobbin goes in a drill. So I only have to attach the yarn I've spun to this bobbin, and I just run it back and forth, and load my fiber onto the storage bobbin. And the drill gives me a quicker way to do that than hand wrapping it. So it's a pretty cool and inexpensive, good solution to a wheel with only one bobbin. One of the things you'll immediately notice if you ever take a look at a CPW in person is that the drive wheel, the big wheel that goes around, is huge. It's massive. That's a standard Ashford traditional style wheel right there that I have next to it, just so you can see the size difference. And why does that matter? Well, the bigger the wheel, again, the more twist you're going to get from the flyer as you're spinning, and that's what makes this such a fast, high twist wheel. Another really cool feature, and very iconic feature I should add, of Canadian production wheels are the cast iron parts. This one has a cast iron footman. That is the piece that connects the wheel from the crankshaft on the drive wheel to the treadle. Now, this has a spike on it, and this spike is dangerous. So I've stuck things on here to protect it, and right now I think something fell off of it in the shuffle. So I recommend getting a cork or something like that to just stick on there and protect your ankles from that spike, because that's dangerous. Another one of the cast iron pieces on a CPW is the treadle itself. They have some really beautiful, intricate designs. This is, of course, where the foot goes while you're spinning, and this is the cast iron treadle on Philippe. Now, while some Canadian production wheels won't necessarily have that cast iron treadle, I've seen some with just a plain wood treadle, and I've seen plenty without that cast iron footman. However, they are all going to have this. This is the defining feature, I guess, of a Canadian production wheel, and that is this cast iron tilt tension system. When we unscrew this wing nut here, it allows the whole flyer assembly to tilt towards or away from the drive wheel. And this is how you control the tension of the spinning wheel. That's how quickly it's going to draw the yarn onto the bobbin. And it's a really sensitive system. You can get just the tiniest little tilt and control the take up really, really well with this system. I like it. I think it's really cool. And this is how it is screwed down onto the table of the spinning wheel. So, with this being the tension system right here, what does that mean for this knob over here? On most Saxony style flyer wheels, like this Ashford Elizabeth, this knob is going to turn because this knob has a screw that goes into the table, and it's what moves the whole flyer assembly and controls the tension. But we have a tilt tension for Philippe. So what is this for? Nothing. It's decorative. Some of them don't even have this knob on the end, but I find it a great place to hang my orifice hook and my spinning notions bag. If you look very, very, very closely at the table of this spinning wheel, you'll see this mark. It almost looks like someone left a glass on the wood. This is what is left of the maker's stamp on this wheel. If you find one that hasn't been dusted and polished for 100 years, you might find a Canadian production wheel that still has the stamp intact. Mine has been worn away, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a curse because I can't see exactly for sure who the maker of this wheel was, but it's also a blessing because whoever had this wheel did take care of the wood, and the wood is in really great shape. It's nourished, it's oiled, it's not dried out or brittle. So, like I said, blessing or a curse. But if you do find a Canadian production wheel, look very closely at the table. You might be able to find a maker's stamp. So let's move from the maker's stamp on the table over to the hub of the drive wheel. With any spinning wheel, you always want to check the hub and make sure it is intact, that there are no cracks, and that all of the spokes of the wheel are in good shape and nothing is loose or falling apart. This is where the power for your spinning comes from, and it's really essential that this is in good shape. On Canadian production wheels, you're going to find this metal rod that goes through the hub of the wheel, and it's what sits on the arms that support the drive wheel itself. And underneath this rod, there should be, it's almost a cup shape. I'll take this apart so you can see it better in 1 second. It's almost a cup shape, but there is this bearing in here. It's a metal bearing, and you want to make sure that that is intact and that it's in good shape, because this is where your wheel is going to rest to turn. When I oil this wheel for spinning, I always put a drop of oil right there in this spot. These pegs are what hold the drive wheel in place. So if any maintenance needs to be done, you can remove these pegs. You can see that bearing in there. And the whole drive wheel can actually come up and out and off of these supports, which it's heavy, and it's also still attached to the Footman back there. So I'm not going to take the whole thing out of there, but I wanted you to see that it can be done, and that can be done for maintenance, for cleaning, and to just ensure that everything is functioning, as well as safety for moving. I will be removing the drive wheel when it is time to move. I feel like having it in a more secure position for the move is going to be better for it. So keep that in mind if you're traveling with one of these wheels, if you're taking it somewhere. Since the drive wheel is so big, it has to clear quite a height if you're going to put this in the back of a vehicle. So being able to pull out those pegs and take down the drive wheel, it's a lot safer for the wheel and a lot more convenient to be able to move it somewhere if you need to. Lots of people have different preferences for what kind of oil they use. I'm just using some Singer sewing machine oil. It's convenient. I have some nearby, so I just put a drop on each side of the wheel, and that does the trick. This is a double drive wheel. I do have a video that I will link that specifically shows how to tie a double drive band onto a wheel. The basic concept, though, is that this is a giant figure eight, and it's going to go on one of these grooves and then come around the flyer down there, and then it's going to go around the other groove and come around the whorl down there, and it's going to have, at some point it has to cross over itself. So that's kind of the basics of the drive band. Just a thin, strong cotton thread is my preference for this wheel, but every wheel is different, and so you might want to play around with different drive band materials and see what works best for you and for your wheel. Now, Philippe does still have his original leather bearings, which is very cool. You do need to oil these. Yes, yes, in fact you do. These are bearings, and there is a friction point here, so I recommend just putting a drop of oil on that leather. If you don't, it could dry out, it can crumble, and it's just an unnecessary wear and tear on the wheel. If the leather bearings do break or come off of your wheel, you can get crafting leather and cut a new piece and kind of stick it in there. There is a space for it to come all the way through the maiden, the support that holds the flyer here on this end. And the other end as well, you can just get a thick, durable leather and you can cut the pieces, wedge it through the support. Just on the front side, of course, you'll have to make sure that there's a larger space for the flyer to be able to fit in there. And see, I do oil. Wherever there's a friction point on my wheel, I put a little oil, and so it's a little greasy, but that's good. That means that this machine is going to run smoothly. I don't think I have seen a single antique wheel that hasn't had some kind of nick or ding, and especially particularly missing hooks. So Philippe is no different. Philippe has a little ding on the On the bobbin right here, that was that way when I got him. I think this was a fairly more recent little ding that he acquired because the wood in there still looks a little fresh. I should probably put a little oil on there just to kind of protect it. And he's missing some hooks. So we're missing this one on this flyer arm, and we're missing this one on this flyer arm, mostly missing. So I just switch arms when I come to that point that I need to come over here and use that hook, and then I come back and come back down. So I can make it work. These kinds of hooks are very difficult to replace. If you do have a flyer that you are thinking of replacing, particularly if it's an old flyer, be really careful. Many of these old flyer hooks are not actually threaded hooks. They're just heated up and pressed into the wood. So that's a thing that they're not going to unscrew, but then there's also a thing where it creates a weak point, and often they break off. They don't pull out, they break off, and so you might still have a piece of metal stuck in there. And if you take something with threads and start screwing it into the flyer arm, well, it takes the force of the thread on the flyer, but it's also weak because it's so thin. And if you go screwing new hooks in there, you risk cracking and breaking your flyer. So be really, really careful with the flyer. And if there's a workaround that you can manage, like I do with Philippe, I highly suggest trying to work around rather than maybe shoving cup hooks into your flyer. You might end up heartbroken. So just be very careful about those flyer hooks. So let me show you how I'm doing some long draw on this wheel. Now I just messed with the tension, so I might have to adjust. And sometimes it's not even a millimeter, it's just a hair's change towards or away from the wheel. It's a very, very, very sensitive tension system. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why people are kind of told this is not a beginner's wheel. Well, if this is the wheel you have and you want to learn to spin, I would say go for it. But yes, just know that it is definitely a little more of a finicky wheel than some of the more modern wheels, and it really is designed to spin a lot of yarn very fast. So it is specialized. So it is, I would say, specialized equipment for that purpose. Okay, so what I'm doing here is a long draw with this roving, and I just have it on the floor. Usually I use a distaff to hold my fiber, but in this case, actually, I prefer it on the floor. This is one of those times when I will say, you know, there are no rules in spinning. Do what you like, and there's always an exception to the rule. So I definitely prefer to have this on the floor, and part of that is just because of the speed at which I'm able to draft and spin this at this wheel. Unrolling it from a distaff actually becomes more of a pain than it does a help. He is a bit chattery, and that is very normal for a double drive wheel. The bobbin rattles. It's just part of how the mechanics of the tension system works. And so very often double drive wheels are described as being chattery. Philippe is no different, but he has good conversations with me, so I don't mind the noise. Now, as you can see how I'm drafting here, I'm pinching to let the twist build up in this section, and then I open up to let the twist run up into the fiber supply, and then I use that twist to, well, you know what? I got too much twist in this section because I was talking too much. That's how quickly this wheel wants to spin. All right. So let's try that again. What I'm doing here is I'm pinching off the twist with this hand, the hand closest to the wheel, and then it's building up a whole lot of twist. And while that's happening, I'm pulling back with my fiber over here, and then I'm going to open this up and let all the twist in. If I have too much twist in this section, it's going to hold tight and I won't be able to draft. It's not going to let that fiber spread out. That twist is going to hold it together with friction. At that point, it's become yarn. So this front hand is making sure I don't get too much twist too soon so that I can still draft out the fiber. But then when it's time, I can open it up and let the twist run in. And this whole process here of the drafting and the pinching, when you get some practice, it becomes so fluid. I really love a good long draw. It's just very relaxing. Very satisfying. And very efficient. Now you've had sort of an overview and a little extra attention to the parts that are very CPW specific, like that tilt tension, the cast iron details, the speed at which that flyer turns, and how this is really a specific machine that is great for long draw. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of this spinning wheel, why they're called Canadian production wheels, where they came from. As always, there is much more about the history of these Canadian production wheels than I could possibly fit into a single video, so further research and inquiry is encouraged. If you have more information about these beautiful wheels, any sources or stories or anything else, please share in the comments section. I will also have links in the video description for my information sources about this history. Let's start with the name, Canadian Production Wheel. This style of wheel has gained this term over time and its accompanying abbreviation CPW. But not all wheels produced in Canada are CPWs. Canadian production wheels were specifically produced in Quebec between 1875 and 1935. They are double drive wheels, often feature cast iron parts, as we saw, and iconically utilize a tilt tension system. So maybe we should start calling them Quebec tilt tension really fast with fancy cast iron parts wheels, you know, for accuracy. When I first heard the term production, I envisioned a factory room with rows of spinning wheels being manually operated to spin yarn. As it turns out, these wheels were not made for textile production mills, but were sold to individual hand spinners, just like we purchase spinning wheels from spinning wheel companies today. There were several reasons why so many women were producing homemade textiles during this time period. Partly it had to do with the difficulty and expense of obtaining commercially produced cloth in the more rural areas of central Canada. Also, women were specifically encouraged by the Canadian government as well as the Catholic Church to engage in revenue-generating farming activities such as beekeeping, raising chickens, and spinning and weaving. This was an attempt to keep French Canadians living on farms in order to keep Quebec's traditional economic and social structures intact during a time when the shift of industrialization was bringing many people out of the country and into cities for work. The term production in the case of the Canadian production wheel is related to the speed at which these wheels can turn and produce twist. The large diameter of the drive wheel of a CPW is usually about 27 to 30 inches, and it gives these wheels high twist ratios. For example, my Philippe gets 24 turns of the flyer for each press of the treadle. This wheel is meant to spin wool, not flax, and will eat up roll-eggs for breakfast, lunch, dinner, as well as second breakfast, elevensies. You get the idea. The 1891 Canadian census documenting industrial establishments counted 16 spinning wheel factories in Quebec at that time. So there was a lot of hand spinning and home textile production happening. A fiber friend named Caroline Foty, who goes by Fiddle Twist on Ravelry and Instagram, has done some amazing in-depth research and compiled her information into an ebook titled Fabricants des Rouets, 19th Century Quebec Spinning Wheel Makers and Their 20th Century Heirs, 1850 to 1950. Here is some of the information I was able to discover about my Philippe thanks to Caroline's research. Philippe was crafted by a second-generation spinning wheel maker named Phileas Carteret. His wheels have distinctive spoke beads, a saddle-style tension mechanism, table corners that are rounded off, and a C-shaped wheel crank. Interestingly, there are even some wheels made by Phileas Carteret that feature double treadles. Phileas Carteret worked for various Canadian railroad companies as a telegraph operator until he was about 30 years old, when he returned home to St. Hyacinthe to take over his father, Michael Carteret's, spinning wheel manufacturing business. This was in 1922. You can also find CPW wheels made by his father, Michael Carteret, and they can be identified by a few subtle differences, including the beadwork on the spokes of the drive wheel. In 1933, a local newspaper, Le Clarion, quoted Phileas Carteret as saying people of the country are returning to their old customs. This was due to the economic crisis of the Depression of the 1930s. Phileas Carteret told the newspaper he was selling 400 to 500 wheels a year at that time. Maybe my Philippe was one of those wheels. Maybe he was the spinning wheel that kept a family in warm woolen clothes and blankets during those hard years of the 1930s. I wonder if those are some of the stories he tells me as he chatters while we spin. Well, I have some spinning to do and a house to pack and move. I don't think that we will be plying this yarn today that I have been spinning. My plan for it is to put the rest of the spin onto a second storage bobbin. Now, there is a bit of a debate over whether or not you need to let your yarn rest before you ply. Some people say it doesn't matter. Some people swear by it. I think we need some experiments perhaps. However, I can say that when I do have a yarn with a high twist, so it comes off the bobbin and it has all those curly cues and pigtails everywhere, letting the bobbin rest before doing the ply, it's not a bad idea. It won't eliminate the twist. That twist is still there. It just kind of gives it a chance to settle down a little bit, and that makes the plying a little easier because you're not fighting with all those pigtails and creating snarls in your yarn. So I'm going to finish this spin with Philippe, and then I am going to put the rest of it onto another storage bobbin, and we will come back to it to ply another day. Probably in my new space, in my new house. So I look forward to seeing you then. Don't forget to subscribe. We have so many more spinning adventures to come. If you have a Canadian production wheel, I would love to hear if you have been able to discover who is the maker of that wheel, any quirks that it has, and do you love spinning with it? Let me know in the comments down below. I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Happy spinning!